Hey, hey, cats and kittens. It's Doc Hammond, and I've got a story for you. Now, most of us these days are feeling a little bit shut in, and you know how it goes when you're stuck in the house with your family for a while. Sometimes the noise everybody makes and the things they say get on your nerves, and even though you love your family, you worry that maybe they're going to drive you crazy. Well, the title of this story is Things Could Always Be Worse. And that's a good thing to keep in mind. Uh, if you get impatient with your family, um, you know, things could be worse. My dad never liked complaining, and my sister and I learned that whenever we were complaining about something, he had a standard line he would use, and it became a kind of joke in the family. I might say, but Dad, I don't like asparagus. And he would say, things are tough all over. And he'd kind of smile. And sometimes I would laugh because it was a kind of joke for us. Or my sister might say, oh, but Dad, I don't want to visit Auntie Noreen. She smells funny. And Dad would say, things are tough all over. Or I might say, Dad, I'm bored. And in our family, that was about the worst kind of complaint you could make because my parents believed we should be interested in enough things that we could never really be bored. But of course, Dad would say the same thing in that joking tone. Things are tough all over. Well, the story I'm going to tell you is a story that takes place in the little town in Michigan where my dad grew up. And in that town, the man who ran the butcher shop was famous not only for making wonderful bologna and other meats, but for being a wise man. And a lot of people would go to Ed Dreyer, that was his name. A lot of people would go to Ed Dreyer for advice as well as for his wonderful ring bologna. Now, ring bologna, just to make sure you know this, is a wonderful kind of sausage, a lot like a summer sausage, except that it's served hot. And it's especially good when it's served with fresh corn on the cob and homemade macaroni and cheese. Those are all things I think that I still like better than asparagus, by the way. Well, anyway, one day, a farmer in town, a guy named Ernie Kruger, and I've actually told you about Ernie in another story if you've heard that one. Anyway, Ernie Kruger came in to see Ed to get some bologna, but also to get some advice. And he said, Ed, it's summer vacation and my kids are home all the time and they're always running through the house playing games and yelling and screaming, playing tag, playing hide and seek. They're having a great time, but they make a ton of noise and it I don't get any rest. I'm out in the barn working with the animals, and then I come inside, and it's like a zoo inside. It's going to drive me crazy. And then on top of that, my wife's parents are visiting, and the three of them just sit around talking all day. When I do get a moment to sit down, it's just blah 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 blah, and I can't even think straight. I'm afraid I'm going to go out of my mind with this. I'm just wondering, is there anything I can do? Can you give me some advice? And Ed said, well, Ernie, I think I probably could help you, but you're going to have to promise me to do whatever I ask you to do, even if it sounds strange to you. And Ernie said, oh, Ed, I'm at the end of my rope. I, I just don't know what to do, so yes, I'll promise to do whatever you say. Okay, Ed said, well, tell me this, Ernie. What animals do you have at home on your farm? And Ernie said, well, we've got a big flock of chickens and a horse and a herd of sheep and 3 cows and 6 pigs. And Ed thought for a minute and he said, okay, yeah, I think I can probably help you. I want you to go home and bring all of the animals into the house with you. How big is your house? Oh gosh, Ernie said, it's really not very big at all. We're so cramped in there already. And now you're asking me to bring in these animals. I don't know if I can do that. And Ed said, Ernie, you made a promise to me. And Ernie said, oh, yes, I did. Okay. So you want me to bring all the animals inside? Oh, boy. Well, the next day, Ernie came back, and he said, Ed, you're making my life a torment. I can't believe it. The noise these animals make, and everybody's crammed into that small house, and the smells, and oh, it's so dirty now. You've turned my house into a barn. And the chickens are everywhere. They're laying eggs everywhere. They're going paka paka bark 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 bark. I can't hear myself think for that noise. And they sit on the couch, and it's just horrible. You got to help me. Well, Ed looked at Ernie and he said, you know what? Why don't you go home and put the chickens back out in the chicken coop? And so that's exactly what Ernie did. But the next day he came back in and he said, Ed, you've turned my house into a horrible place to be. I can't stand being there now. All the noise, all the smells. Oh, it's just awful. The horse has been whinnying all the time right in my ear, and then he's eating the pillows on the couch. It's just horrible. Well, it said, okay, well, go home and put the horse back out in the stable. Next day, Ernie was back again, but he was still miserable. He said, oh, Ed, it's awful now. It's the sheep. They're just bleating, meh, meh, and they're butting everybody and knocking people over, and we're all bruised now. Ed said, well, okay, go home and put the sheep back out in the pasture. And the next day, Ernie came back in and he said, oh, Ed, I thought you were going to be able to help me, but it's horrible there at home. The cows are all over the house, and we have to milk them, and they kick over the milk pails, and they're mooing all the time. They're going moo, moo, and they're bellowing, and it's horrible. And when we try to watch TV, they just stand there and stare at us, chewing their cuds. I think I'm going to go crazy, Ed. What can I do? And Ed said, well, go home and put the cows back out in the barn. Well, the next day, Ernie came back, and he was still miserable. He said, Ed, I can't believe that I can continue this way much longer. I think I'm going out of my mind. It's those pigs. They oink, and they snort, and they make all kinds of noise, and they eat anything that falls on the floor, and then they poop everywhere. I can't stand it. You've got to help me. And Ed said, Ernie, go home. Put the pigs back out in their pig pen. Well, the next day, actually, before the next day, Ed had one more thing to say. He said, put the pigs back out in the pig pen, and while you're at it, tell your wife's parents that it's probably time for them to go home. Well, the next day, Ernie came back, and he was like a new man. He said, oh, Ed, you saved my life. You've made life sweet again for me. It's so wonderful. The house, it seems so roomy and clean and quiet. I don't know how to thank you. How can I thank you? And Ed said, well, Ernie, this is a butcher shop. You could buy some bologna. And that's exactly what Ernie did. And I would just say to all of you too, remember, things could always be worse. And while you're sitting around the house, if you get a little impatient with your brother or sister or your parents or your grandparents or anybody else, just remember that things could be worse. And remember that you're lucky to be home with the people who love you. I hope I'll have another story for you again soon.